Hello and welcome to this Aftermaths episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths with me, John Cripwell.
And with me, Becky Brown.
Hello everyone. Hello Becky. How are
Hi,
you?
John. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Busy as always. But yeah, lots going on. But today as we record this, yesterday when this goes out, a big day for lots of schools and teachers across the country because finally, a little bit delayed and a little bit later than originally advertised, and maybe we could talk about that in a moment, but the Key Stage 2 results have been released, so I have been looking at those this morning.
That's great, John. I haven't had a chance to have a look yet, so I'm looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are.
Well, you can react live as I go through them because I've been looking at a little bit of analysis, and the data that we've got at the moment is fairly broad, national data, but I think we can begin to draw some conclusions from it about the picture of teaching teaching maths perhaps across the country, or certainly, if not the teaching of maths, then at least the outcomes at the end of Key Stage 2 in terms of this one-off test. And we all know the flaws of that particular system, and we won't rehash that today because I think everybody's probably familiar with that. But I will just say, as a fully paid up member of the Year 6 Teaching Union, the delay this year in producing these results, it's just an absolute farce, isn't it, Becky? It's a fiasco.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I know it may seem, if you've never been involved in it, like it's just a date, it's moved, it's fine. But there is so much that goes around it, isn't it? And there's actually some work that needs to be done between the results coming in and the end of term. And it's a really busy time. And yeah, the delay was really the last thing that anybody needed.
Well, some schools have already finished for the summer. I know some Leicestershire schools and things have already broken up, and I'm sure some other areas of the country as well. Others finish today, Friday, and one or two, a few are still going into next week. But leaders will certainly be working on these over the next couple of days and probably over the summer. That happens anyway to an extent, but it's really unfair, I think, for teachers and leaders to have been made to wait a little bit longer, because this is not a new thing. The SATs have been marked in this way for years now. There's always, I think, there's often been issues and things, but this is it seems particularly bad this year.
Delay before. I don't think there's ever been a delay. I think, like you said, there have been a few issues, but I don't ever remembering it not happening on the day promised.
No. And you know, there's children waiting for these results as well, aren't there? And I'm gonna have to just pause a second because just bear with me. We often say to the kids that the SATs results, that, you know, they're not that important, are they, in terms of their progress and their development and things. It's a moment in time. Nobody's going to be asking you for your test results in years to come. However, the reality is that the children have been working on this certainly throughout Year 6 and have been aware of it, and it's been a date in their academic calendar for the whole year. And they want to know how well they've done.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating for them to be told that actually, you know, through no fault of their own, that they're going to have to wait a little bit longer. However, they're here now, and however your school has done, whatever you were expecting and whatever the outcome is, I hope you can try to view them objectively, because if you're in Year 6, we need to remember it's not all about you in Year 6. These are Key Stage 2 data, and because sometimes it can feel a little bit like it's been left to Year 6 because they're so involved in it, but it's not just Year 6, is it? It's Key Stage 2 data, and even that Key Stage 2 progress relies on what's happened before very much in, you know, Key Stage 1 and early years foundation stage. We know that this is a moment in time in a child's ongoing journey of education. It's certainly not a summative reflection of everything that they've done, and certainly not an indicator of how effective the year 6 teaching or year has been, is it?
No, it's a culmination, isn't it? And as you said, I think it can be hard to see it like that when you're in year 6 and delivering the tests, but it really is in the same way that it should be celebrated by everybody that's had an input, because it is a culmination of
Absolutely.
a long time of primary education.
Yeah, yeah. So if they're really good, it's not just the year 6 teacher that's responsible for that. And equally, if they're not quite what you were hoping, it's not just the year 6 teacher that's responsible for that either. However, the important thing as well to remember is that they are already historic. They are, that they've been and gone. They're at even at a school level, they are just a reflection of that particular cohort at that moment in time on that day back in May when these tests were taken. And there can be a tendency to look at the outcomes of the data and think, oh, we didn't do very well on algebra this year. We need to have more of a focus across the school on algebra. When really, as I say, that might be one question that's given rise to that particular piece of data analysis. And so the context is really important, as are the cohort demographics and that journey that cohort has been on throughout their education. And one thing, Becky, to bear in mind about this particular cohort is that they were in reception during the start of the pandemic, and so their reception year and their year 1 year, and to some extent, even the year or two after that, things were still affected by the pandemic, and even the DFE, who Ofsted certainly have said that in the past we can't keep mentioning the pandemic and blaming things on the pandemic. But it was interesting to see that the DFE have given that context today and reminded everybody that these children for this particular set of data were greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So that all needs taking into account as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean I do think for this cohort, the cohort that missed reception, I mean, I feel like that has to have had a huge impact for some of them on their learning. It's such a formative time, isn't it? That it's great that it has been recognised, because I think I know we keep saying can't keep harping on about it, but it happened, and it happened at a really key point in these children's lives.
Yeah, and it's not even just the knowledge, is it? It's just not just from a maths point of view, the knowledge of how to make number bonds to 10 or how to do early addition and subtraction. It's all the skills and the learning behaviours and things that go along with that. We know how important early years is in developing the skills that children need for learning and for socialising and for interacting with each other and all those things. And so, and don't forget, those children didn't just lose the reception experience, they also lost a lot of the interaction with their peers outside of school as well. Clubs, play groups, all those sorts of things were shut down, weren't they? So, my daughter was 2 at the time, and she had a very different experience of being 2 and 3 and 4 than her elder sister did. She missed out on loads of play groups and nursery and all that sort of stuff. So all of that, I think, needs taking into account when we're looking at this. However, let's get into it a little bit, shall we? So, let's talk about the again, this is just national data, and it's just the headlines really, but I've tried to delve into it as much as I can. So we'll look at the combined reading, writing, and maths to start with. Reading and maths, obviously, against the test. GPS isn't taken into account in this combined score at all. Grammar, punctuation, and spelling test isn't taken into account in this, but the teacher assessed writing is. So the combined attainment increased again this year from 62% last year to 63% this year. Still below that 2019 figure of 65%, but getting closer. So there's definitely been a measurable increase year on year, it seems. Interestingly, reading is above pre-pandemic attainment for the first time. So that's impressive, because I think everybody's felt that reading has been one of the things that has been impacted by the rise in digital devices and things like that. So that's encouraging that reading is up there. What is interesting though is the rise in the number of pupils that were identified as working below the level of the test or below the curriculum requirements for the test. So that figure was 5.2% in 2019, but this year it was 8.1%. So that's a noticeable increase. Yeah. Just, about one in 11, 1 in 12 pupils. So, 2 or 3 in a class, in a typical class of 30 is significant, isn't it?
Yeah, that really is. Yeah, that's quite surprising, Jon.
Which area of the country would you say, Becky, had the highest attainment?
Southeast.
Kind of, yeah. London.
Yeah.
London. So 70%. 70% in London. And London's interesting because obviously it is such... I mean, it's a large area. Just saying London, you're talking millions of people there, aren't you? But there's real areas of deprivation there, obviously, and real areas of advantage. But that was at 70%, and Central Bedfordshire was the lowest at 50%. So I'm not sure what's happening in Central Beds, whether that's an ongoing thing or not. I haven't had a chance to look into that yet, but interesting nonetheless. But the DfE said that just going back to the rise in the number of pupils working below the curriculum requirements, they've said that has actually contributed to the overall figures in a meaningful way, actually. So that will be a line of inquiry for them, I think, moving forward. So useful for teachers to think about that a little bit. Can we just pause for a second? So other headline sort of figures really for the combined, the disadvantage gap, pupil premium, pupils and others identified as disadvantaged remains about the same. So no significant change there this year. In terms of pupils with SEND, 24% met the combined standard. And if you have an EHCP, then only 9% of those pupils met the combined standard, which looks sort of shocking, doesn't it? But you have to take into account there's a reason why these pupils have been identified as having additional or educational needs. So it does sort of tell a story, doesn't it? But again, I would imagine that this will be a line of inquiry. So if we're thinking about what might be on the agenda next year, moving forwards, I think inclusion is still going to be a big thing, isn't it? Clearly. And the number, whether that ties in with those pupils that have been identified as working below the level of the curriculum. I haven't got the data on that at the moment to say how many of those pupils were identified as having SEND, but it'll be interesting to see when that data comes along, whether there's any sort of correlation there, I suppose.
Yeah, there's been such a big push, hasn't there, on inclusion, Jon? And again, we have to recognise that everything's a big journey, isn't it? You can't, just because it's been talked about and reports have come out, we can't suddenly think that it's going to have an impact. We would hopefully see that over time. But yeah, more
as with all these things, everybody wants immediate improvements, don't they? But that's just not how things work. And we know from all the research around implementation of change and things that you have to have a process that is ongoing. And to be fair, from what I've heard, maybe not from every inspection and every bit of support work that's been going on, but by and large, I think what people are looking for who come to visit your school is to see that things are in place to try and make that change, even if it isn't, measurable immediately. I think as long as there's evidence that you're trying to do those things. But yeah, so as a maths leader, I would definitely be, again, looking at what are we doing for SEND? Is that working? Is there any changes that we need to do? Can I tell the story of what's happening with those pupils so that, we want to support them as best as we possibly can, don't we? As we do with all the children in school. Let's have a look at maths in particular then, Becky.
Okay.
So the expected standard, number of pupils reaching the expected standard in maths rose again by a percentage point to 75% compared to 74% last year, 79% in 2019. So again, comparing it back to pre-pandemic levels, 2019 seems to be that benchmark, that gold standard. edging closer to it again. Again, though, part of that might be because of the higher attaining pupils. So the higher attaining number of percentage of pupils reaching the higher standard in maths was 27% this year, which is great, isn't it? When you think about, over a quarter of pupils are reaching that higher attainment standard. That is the same as it was in 2019. And it's 1% higher than it was last year. So there's a story that we can begin to tell there, isn't there? That pupils who are doing well in maths are finding it easier to do well in maths. I mean, it's not that surprising, is it? Really, if you, but the number of pupils that applies to doesn't seem to have been affected massively by everything that they've gone through with the pandemic and things, which is interesting. I think that's interesting. It would be really interesting to unpick that a little bit more and see quite why that's happening.
Yeah.
But it might be masking, Becky, the fact that other groups of pupils are perhaps falling behind a little bit, or a gap is beginning to open between those who find maths to be easier and those who find it to be a much more difficult subject to access. And I know anecdotally that that's what teachers tell me all the time is, what we're doing works for most of the pupils, but what do I do for those ones who are really finding life trickier?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jon. I think, again, anecdotally, when thinking back to when sort of the mastery approach really came to the forefront and people started talking about it, I was in a very large school at the time. I was doing lots of talks with the whole school community. And I think at that point, people were concerned about those previous higher attaining children. And they were saying, well, actually, if we're suddenly going to slow everything down or go into more detail, what's going to happen with these children?
Yeah.
And actually, that maybe turns out not to be where we should have been focusing our attention, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did lots of work around that as well. And
Yeah.
in Planet Maths, we've made sure that there are, greater depth challenges, if you like, throughout lessons and things, because we need to make sure that we are catering for those people. So I think it's right to consider them and keep them in mind.
Yeah.
I think what we can say is everything that we've done is working really well for them. But I am concerned that it is masking a problem for another group of pupils.
Yeah.
Because that we can look at the headlines and say, okay, great, attainment's increased, but has it increased for everybody? And we don't have the data yet. It will come out normally in September time, that will allow us to dig into that a little bit more. But I think anecdotally, from what, as I say, from conversations that I've had and from what this data seems to be presenting, there's another group of children that this perhaps in its current format isn't working as well for. And I think there's potentially lots and lots of reasons for that. Again, we can take into account the numbers of pupils that are working below the curriculum, the level of the curriculum. We can take into account that the rising number of pupils identified with SEND and things. But whatever it is, we need to do something to address it, don't we? Because
Absolutely.
what we don't want is this to continue increasing, where those who are doing well do even better, and those who are finding it harder fall further behind. That's not the kind of equity that we've been talking about, is it, for in recent months? However, one thing that I think is important to caveat all this with is that just because 24% of pupils, let's call it a quarter, haven't met the expected standard, that is not the same as saying a quarter of pupils can't do maths.
No.
And we fall into that trap sometimes, and I won't be surprised to see a headline that says something around that, and there will be posts on LinkedIn. I know people will tag me in posts on LinkedIn that will say, we're failing these pupils because a quarter of them aren't meeting the expected standard in maths. But you are looking at a pupil there who might have missed the expected standard by 1 mark, is in the same category as a pupil who only scored 1 mark in the entire papers. Do you know what I mean? It's a very broad segment of pupils there, and we need to be really careful. Is that the test makes it look like a pass-fail thing, and to me, it's not. You could have had a pupil who's worked really, really hard and made enormous progress and can do maths, but for whatever reason, for whatever barriers, maybe it's just a time thing. Maybe like me, they're a summer born and they just needed a couple more months. That they've just not quite made it over the line, or they had a bad day on the day of the test. We're talking about 10 and 11-year-old children, aren't we?
Yeah.
So I do think that is definitely something that I would be bringing into a conversation if I was talking about data and things. The numbers of pupils that you might have that are scoring in the high 90s, to me, over this many marks in a test, that's still an indication they clearly can do maths. They can do maths. There's just clearly some gaps that they might have that need addressing. And my worry is that if they see themselves as failing at this point as they go to secondary school, they're just going to switch off, aren't they? They're going to say, maths is not for me. I'll focus on something I'm better at. And I can understand that.
Yeah, having that such strict it is a threshold, isn't it? It's either you're in it or
It's
you're
binary, isn't it? You're either there or you're not there, and it comes down to one mark.
Exactly, and it just does not tell the whole story.
And that's not the same at GCSE or anything else. You can get a 9 or an 8 or a 7 and at GCSE, and all of those are seen as achievements, aren't they? And good quality pass grades and things. But a 99 and 100 in Key Stage 2 SATs are seen as two totally different things, and that's crazy. Anyway, I'll get off my pedestal, my high horse there a little bit. Wouldn't be the same, would it, if I didn't have a little rant somewhere during the week? One more final thing I think to consider, which was interesting when we're thinking about that group of children that are working below the level of the test. In maths particularly, those difficulties are rarely isolated to maths. So out of all the pupils who sat the tests and things, or didn't sit the tests, who were identified as working below the level of the test, only 522 of those were identified as being below the level of the curriculum in maths alone. So only 522 were identified as just being in maths. There was 1,484 that were identified as being below the level of the test in reading and maths, and 566 in writing and maths, which is interesting. But nearly 23,000 pupils were identified as being below the level of the curriculum in all three areas, which suggests, doesn't it, that that's not a maths thing or a reading thing or a writing thing. It's a much broader issue.
Definitely.
And again, all of those will be individual children with all their individual needs and reasons and things like that, and their individual stories. Could be social, could be emotional, could be disability, or all sorts of different barriers to learning. But it is. I did think it was interesting that very few, really, as a proportion, were just in maths alone.
Yeah, that's a very low number. Much lower. If you'd asked me to predict, which I'm glad you didn't, I would have gone much higher than that. As 500.
I should have done. We should go back and edit it. You could make yourself look really good now.
Yeah.
So, however the SATs have landed for you this year, I think what we can take out of that is that the broader context. To me, the national picture is possibly a little bit more useful, actually, in lots of ways than individual children's data or an individual school's data, because there's so many stories behind, that smaller population. That I find it really hard to look at a school's SATs data for a particular year and say, oh, well, you can see what's happening here. You can't. It's impossible. And I think it's unfair that schools are asked to publish that data on their website every year and things. But from a national point of view, I think there are useful things that you can take out of it, because, you look at a much larger sample, aren't you? And you can begin to unpick a little bit of what's happening on a national picture there.
Yeah, it comes down to that sample size again, doesn't it? Which we talked about lots of times, and the statistics, and making sure that you're analysing things in the right way. I think you're right. The national picture tells us which direction we need to go in overall.
Yeah. Yeah. And it'll be useful when we get that more in-depth data that can perhaps tell us a little bit more, again, probably around September time. So, SATs were not the only thing that came onto my radar this week. There were a couple of really interesting pieces of research that were reported on this week around AI and maths. And funnily enough, actually, I wrote an article earlier this week around the best use of AI in supporting teachers with maths and things, which you won't be surprised to know is not to create lesson plans or worksheets. I think that's a teacher's job, skilled teachers' jobs. But I think there are definitely things that we can use AI for. AI can definitely make our lives a little easier as teachers. But this was not around teacher workload, particularly this research. This was around pupils using AI and what's happening with pupils and homework and tests and things like that. So there was quite a broad analysis that's happened here. 3.2 million interactions were analysed here for this data. So yeah, this is big. And we're talking high school and college students in the US and elsewhere who are looking at this, and some middle school students as well, actually, I should say. And they're looking at before ChatGPT appeared and after ChatGPT appeared, and how long it took pupils to answer, how long was spent answering word problems specifically.
Right.
Okay. And it found that, and they reckon that the data was skewed here because some children would have been using AI and others wouldn't. But there was a large decrease in time spent on answering word problems after ChatGPT came in. I mean, some pupils were literally answering them in seconds. However, when they were taken into a classroom setting or an exam setting, the time spent didn't change. So there's real evidence here that pupils are using AI to answer word problems, and the success rate for these word problems also increased noticeably from when pupils were given ChatGPT or had access to ChatGPT to before they had access to ChatGPT. However, when those people, so it was up to 80% correct on these homework things. However, when pupils were then taken back to be supervised again, that fell from 80% to 60%, which was actually lower than before ChatGPT came along, before the AI came along. So it's interesting that students are not, and this is human nature, I suppose, but students are not seeing homework as a useful thing to learn from. They're seeing it very much as something that has to be ticked and done, and then they can get on with their lives. But the research also suggested that the learning was decreasing because of this use of, so they were getting worse at answering word problems, essentially. They were getting worse at answering word problems because they were relying on ChatGPT and other AI, large language models, I guess. It was ChatGPT that was referenced in this paper, but other ones are available, obviously. The levels of skill and knowledge were actually decreasing because of the reliance on this technology.
Wow. I suppose that isn't surprising, isn't it? We talk about a lot about.
Yeah, I don't think it's surprising that they're using it. What surprised me was the impact that it seemed to be having on long-term learning.
Yeah,
potentially.
Well, it's fighting against what we're always talking about teaching children to become mathematicians and not just children who can do maths, isn't it? ChatGPT could do the maths, but it
can now. It didn't used to be able to, but it can now. Yeah,
always actually.
Yeah,
it comes back to that. If we're taking away that mathematicianness, it's not a word, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
then we are going to affect learning, aren't we? Because we know that that's actually what's really important in maths. It's not the so necessarily.
I think people used to feel this way about calculators. Oh no, calculators have come in and now, people are not going to be as good at arithmetic. And maybe that was the case, that maybe people were not quite as good as arithmetic. But problem solving, we all know that a calculator can't solve a problem for you. But we do have this technology now that can, AI can solve a word problem for you. The other thing that was interesting was that, so they looked at word problems, they also looked at graphing problems, and they found no change in the amount of time taken to answer a problem that required somebody to complete or create a graph or answer questions from a graph, or the success rate. That didn't change either. So it's definitely word problems, and we all know, don't we, that the difficulties that word problems can present to pupils and adults. They are a particular bane of children's lives and teachers' lives and things. And so it's probably not surprising that children have gone, well, I'll just ask ChatGPT. I mean, I've done it, Becky.
Yeah,
I've done it. I've done my working out. I've looked at it and I thought, is that right? I'll ask ChatGPT, and it's it's obviously confirmed that I am 100% correct. But yeah, but it's it's fascinating.
Yeah, even now, and this is not a maths thing, but I was doing some drama homework with one of my children, and we had to look a fact up. We were looking for a bit of fact that we needed about a show. But it's hard now, even if you just put something into a search engine, the first thing that comes up is an AI response giving you far more information than you asked for, which may or may not always be true. And obviously part of it is that you have to then fact check it. You wouldn't just take it at value. But it's becoming increasingly harder not to use AI, or not to accidentally use it, in that it's giving you an answer that it might present as what you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, I've got an iPhone, and it used to be I asked Siri a question and it would search the internet and show me some answers to. Now it says, do you want to use ChatGPT to answer this?
Yeah.
So we can't get away from it. It's here, isn't it? For better and for worse. And I think there are some things that it does really well and will definitely help with. There's all sorts of cons to it as well, not just in terms of the workforce and whether we're thinking. I mean, one of the headlines from this research was around the reduction in thinking that was happening amongst these students because of their reliance on AI. And thinking is a skill. You need to flex that muscle, don't you, and use it in order to maintain it and improve it.
And we know those skills, there was some NFER research a little while ago into employment essential skills, and thinking was thinking, collaboration, all those things that AI can't necessarily do are the things that children are going to need to be able to do in their future as well. So it's a very fine balance, isn't it?
Yeah. And if it, we need to be careful, don't we? We have to live with this. We have to find a way to make it work for us. But how do we safeguard? How do we put the guardrails on to make sure that it's not negatively impacting our children? And it's interesting, in the UK this year, we've got the social media ban coming in, haven't we, for under 14s? I wonder whether we're going to find ourselves in a spot where we need to have similar or some sort of restrictions on the use of AI, because I think that could have, this is just me, maybe I'm catastrophizing, but I think this could have as great an impact on children as as social media might have, in a different way. But in terms of we work so hard to get children to think, and a lot of things that we talk about are how can you get them to notice something and then think about that thing. And if we're just outsourcing that thinking to a computer, that's scary to me. So it was interesting. I'll put the links to these articles in the show notes if you want to go and have a look at them. They're not all scaremongering, doom and gloom. It's just the what the research has found, and then we need to have a think about, well, what does that mean? How do we incorporate this into our lives, because it is here, but what do we do to make sure that children aren't just outsourcing their thinking to a machine? Because that truly could be catastrophic.
Yeah. It's a tool, isn't it? It's another tool, and like any tool, you need to learn how to use it effectively and efficiently. Unfortunately, this particular tool is moving at such a great rate. I don't think we're able to keep up, or it's a struggle to try to keep up with how advanced it's coming so quickly.
Yeah, yeah. So food for thought there. Food for thought. If you have any thoughts on that, how can we utilize AI in a useful way for pupils? I think there's loads of ways that we could do it for teachers without de-skilling teachers or without taking away from that expert in the room. But how can we make AI useful but not detrimental for pupils? That's what I'm interested in next. Watch this space. Let us know. I think that's pretty much all we've got time for this week, Becky. If you are breaking up for the summer, enjoy. We will be here with you. Less school chat. We'll try and find some interesting general knowledge, facts, and things around maths to talk about over the summer, as we usually do during the holidays. But we will be here. We'll be back in September. I've been busy recording some interviews with some genuinely world-renowned experts in their field. So I'm looking forward to bringing those to you in September as well. But otherwise, we hope you have a lovely final day, week, whatever you've got left in school.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the end of term, and we will see you next time.
If you'd like to get in touch with the show at any point, you can always drop us an email at primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk. You can find the link in the show notes. And as always, we'd always appreciate you leaving us a review or sharing us with a colleague. Don't keep it all to yourself. We will see you next week. We'll be back on Friday. Thanks again, Becky.
Bye for now.
Ta-ra.